Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. As you can see, I'm not in my home studio. I'm actually in Fort Worth, Texas. And this weekend, beginning tomorrow and Saturday, we'll be having an Awaiting His Return conference. Actually, third time we've been here, 3 years in a row. Always good to be back with Dr. Bob Pearl and Birchman Baptist Church. And if you'd like to join us, it's only going to be streamed on Saturday, and you can watch it from the Behold Israel Facebook page or the Behold Israel YouTube channel, and you can join us there. And I believe it starts at 9 a.m. Texas time. That's 2 hours ahead of you on the West Coast and an hour behind you on the East. And join us for an awesome day. Going to be myself, obviously, Amir Sarfati, Pastor Jack Hibbs, and I believe Dr. Bob Pearl is going to be teaching. I thought it was Mike Golay, Pastor Mike, but we'll see. I just saw something this morning that indicated it might be Dr. Bob, who's a wonderful Bible teacher, and always exciting to hear him. So join us tomorrow, if you would, right there on the Behold Israel Facebook page or the Behold Israel YouTube channel. Also, just wanted to say thank you for those who pre-ordered the book that's coming out in January. Thank you guys for taking a look at that, Bible Prophecy, The Essentials. And I'll remind you, basically what happened with this book is the Q&As that many of you watch that Amir and I do together and been doing for the past couple of years. We took the most commonly asked questions and answered them in print form and broke them down into chapters. So you can look chapter by chapter at each subject to whatever it is that you're wanting to know, and maybe your question's in there. And you can take a look at that. So if you'd like to pre-order, which, again, this is different, I know, to order something that you're not going to get till January, but it's very helpful to get the numbers up on Amazon, which causes other groups, booksellers, to be interested in carrying the book. And this is a subject, as I mentioned last week, Amir and I get this question or comment everywhere we go. It doesn't matter if we're in the Philippines or in Australia or New Zealand. Everybody, or many people, I should say the same thing, or South Africa for that matter. And that is, there's very few teaching, if any, teaching Bible prophecy. And we hear that comment over and over and over. So here's a print form resource for you to flip through subject by subject, beginning with Israel and ending with the great white throne judgment in heaven and everything that happens in between. The rapture of the church, questions about that. The tribulation, why is there a millennium, is one of the questions that we'll answer as well. So I think you find it encouraging, and it'd be really super helpful, again, if you would go and pre-order the book. I think it's $14 or something like that. And anyway, it just positions it in the new release category in a favorable spot where others will see it and maybe pique their interest as well. Now, one other thing before we begin, and actually our first story is going to be the reason why I'm saying what I'm saying, and that is we're going to be switching platforms and moving and directing you over to my personal webpage. The reason for that is last week, and I don't know if I mentioned this, I can't remember, but last week I got a warning from YouTube for something I said on October 21st, 2021. And they sent me a warning, said, one more, and, you're going to be shut down for a week. And then, I don't know what their rules are, but anyway, they sent me the link to what it was that they removed, the content that they removed. That was medical disinformation. And, the crazy thing about it is they said in their warning to me that they will not allow anything on YouTube that basically goes against what the World Health Organization and the CDC have recommended. Now, the crazy thing about this is I got the warning from information I gave from the CDC about the number of children under 5 and 6 years old who have gotten and died from COVID. And that was CDC numbers. But again, we'll talk about why this is important. But in the coming weeks, we'll be shifting over to barrystagner.com, and you can watch the lineup from there. And it's just inevitable. Amir has been locked out of his own Facebook page. I have people at the church tell me who have evangelism-based Facebook pages that they've been shut down and locked out of theirs. And so that's the day and age that we live in. And that indeed is prophetic. So let's jump in and check out this first story. And it comes from our very own state, or my very own state of California. And it's actually being reported by The Hill. Governor Newsom signs controversial social media bill into California law. Now, this is law, and it has been signed by this governor who continues to act under emergency rules, even though, as we'll see later in the program, the World Health Organization said, COVID is pretty much near its end. We can see the end. And yet Newsom, because of the powers to bypass the state legislature, is just still operating in the form of basically a tyrant, really, one who is working outside the system that has been put in place to protect the people, and not have someone in a dictatorship type position just arbitrarily doing whatever it is that they feel should be done. Now, the Hill says California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed into law a social media transparency measure that he says protects residents from hate and disinformation posts. That's what I got the warning for. Spread through social media platforms. A bill, Assembly Bill 587, will require social media companies to publicly post their policies regarding hate speech, disinformation, harassment, and extremism on their platforms and report data on their enforcement of the policies. The newly signed legislation will also require platforms to file semi-annual reports to the state's Attorney General office that will disclose their policies on hate speech, extremism, and disinformation. The state Attorney General's office is also required to make all terms of service reports submitted pursuant to those provisions available to the public in a searchable repository on its official internet website. The bill was first introduced by State Rep. Jesse Gabriel, a Democrat, and was co-authored by a group of state reps, including Buffy Wicks, Jordan Cunningham, and Senators Richard Pan, Henry Stern, and Scott Wiener. One of them, Jordan Cunningham, is a Republican. The others are Democrats. And pardon me a minute, I just touched something on my iPad that caused it to shrink, and I'm having enough trouble seeing it already. Here we go. Back in action. Social media has created incredible opportunities, but also real and proximate threats to our kids, to vulnerable communities, and to American democracy as we know it. Gabriel said in a statement, this new law will finally pull back the curtain and require tech companies to provide meaningful transparency into how they are shaping our public discourse, as well as the role of social media in promoting hate speech, disinformation, conspiracy theories, and other dangerous content. I'm grateful to Governor Newsom for signing this bill and for his leadership in protecting kids and vulnerable communities online. Now, this is the same batch of folks that are protecting drag queen readings at libraries and all these other kind of things, and yet they're touting how much they want to protect the public. Well, what this is actually socialism in action, Marxism in action, controlling the media, controlling the narrative, making sure that everything that is being said out there and read out there is in line with what the state believes is necessary or valuable. And according to the Washington Post, several big tech companies and tech industry trade groups have filed lawsuits in Texas and Florida to attempt to block similar social media regulatory laws enacted in those states. And the bill is likely to be struck down as unconstitutional because legal experts say, according to the First Amendment, free speech is the main issue. And this is an unconstitutional and substantial taxpayer expense law. And the censorial consequences should trigger the highest level of constitutional scrutiny, but the undue burdens and lack of consumer benefit ensures it won't survive even lower levels of scrutiny, according to Santa Clara University School of Law professor Eric Goldman. Now, once again, we've talked about this, and it needs to be reminded for all of us, when you have these tyrannical type governments that are trying to take over, controlling the narrative is essential to advancing their agenda. And that's why you see in some of these countries like Iran and like Russia, you have state-run media. And that's what this is. The state is trying to handle social media and filter out anything that they don't want the public to hear, including the truths of God's word. And it's just amazing, how many Christians are being filtered, and basically I'm already being major shadow banned on Facebook. And it's just incredible the way that they're treating people who are just giving information out that's valuable to the community. and does them no harm. But because it's against the state's agenda and the promotion of certain lifestyles and protection of them, and the other issues that we see going on in our world today, they're seeking to shut us down. Now, the Gateway Pundit has another story along the same lines. A Democrat Senate candidate says we have to kill the extremist Republican movement. To the communist left, loving your country, protecting its borders, bringing jobs back to our shores, banning late-term abortions before birth, honoring your forefathers, promoting safe streets, and believing in American exceptionalism is extremist and dangerous. Democrat Senate candidate Tim Ryan from Ohio this week told MSNBC the country needs to kill the extremist Republican movement. Imagine for 1 second that this came out of the mouth of a Republican candidate about the Democrats. Ryan told the MSNBC audience, how do we fix all these broken systems? Some of those answers will come from Republicans, not the extremists that we're dealing with every single day. We got to kill and confront that movement. That comes after a weekend where top Democrats compared Republicans to Al-Qaeda on 9/11. Kamala Harris compared the Islamists behind the September 11th attacks to the threat of Trump supporters. And this comes less than a month after Joe Biden delivered his Moloch speech declaring war on his political opponents. And as the FBI continues to act as the Democrat Party's paramilitary force to round up, stalk, harass, and imprison Trump supporters, even Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, is not safe from that regime. I'm sure many of you have seen that his phone, Mike Lindell's phone on a hunting trip, was confiscated when his car was surrounded by the FBI. And, they pitched their normal nonsense about why they had to do this identity theft and other ridiculous things. But he's a big-time pro-Trump guy, so they're trying to shut him down. So, again, this is what we're facing in these last days. And we also know that there's, and I found this to be interesting, and I don't want to give away too much about my message tomorrow at the conference, but I have just been stunned by how many stories are related to what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. I'm going to teach through Revelation chapter 6, 1 through 8, and the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and how many of these stories today are related to what's coming under their ride of terror. And Market Watch reports the biggest Fed rate hike in 40 years could be coming next week. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and times are arguably increasingly desperate. The persistence of high inflation might force the Federal Reserve to resort to the biggest increase in a key U.S. interest rate in more than 40 years. After another dismal U.S. inflation report, economists at the brokerage Nomura Securities on Tuesday, became the first on Wall Street to predict a full percentage point increase in the Fed's benchmark short-term rate. We continue to believe markets underappreciate just how entrenched the U.S. inflation has become and the magnitude of response that will likely be required from the Fed to dislodge it, the economists at Nomura wrote in a report to clients. The last time the Fed made such a drastic move was in the early 1980s, another period marked by sky-high inflation. And for those of you who weren't around back in the 1980s, I had friends who lost their home, who had variable rate mortgages, and the interest rate went up to 14 and 15%. Can you imagine that, a 15% loan on your home? And that's where things seem to be headed. And at the last of these two meetings, the Monetary Policy Setting Federal Open Market Committee raised the targeted rate by 0.75 points. And in August, the consumer index price index rose a scant 0.1%, largely because of another big drop in energy prices. And the annual pace of inflation slowed a bit from 8.3 from 8.5. But that's the only good news. The cost of almost everything else rose last month, including food, rent, clothes, furniture, cars, medical care, and so forth. And the result? Another price measure viewed by the Fed as a better indicator of future inflation trends rose sharply in August and hit the highest yearly rate in 5 months. Now, as this previous story mentioned, and one of the things that I'm going to talk about tomorrow and Saturday in my message at the Awaiting His Return conference, and again, if you want to catch it, Saturday only, Behold Israel Facebook page, Behold Israel YouTube channel, and you can join us there. And I think Pastor Jack Hibbs is going to kick the day off, and I'm going to follow him. and then I think Dr. Bob Pearl, and then Amir will round out the day. And then finally, the fifth session will be a Q&A, and those are always fun. So anyway, if you want to tune in, Behold Israel YouTube channel, Behold Israel Facebook page, Saturday only from 9 a.m. Texas time till I believe it ends at 5. The Georgia Star News is reporting, as I'll be talking about tomorrow, the runaway inflation, so to speak, and a quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley basically costing a day's pay. And the Georgia Star News is reporting that food prices at 40-year high keep breaking records every month. Food prices have increased every month of 2022, with each month since February breaking 40-year-old records, according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The price of food at home increased 13.5% a year over year in August, its highest since it's been since May of 1979, according to the BLS Consumer Price Index. Since February, when the year-over-year cost of food at home increased by 8.6% at the time, the highest level since 1981, grocery prices have increased every month, first breaking a 10% year-on-year increase in March, according to the archived CPI reports by the BLS. The rate of increase blows away the increases over the past 2 years, with food at home prices increasing 3.5% in 2020 and 2021, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. The increases are also well above the USDA's August 25th estimate of a year-on-year food at home price increase between 10 and 11% in 2022. The food at home index rose 13.5% over the last 12 months, the largest 12-month increase since the period ending March of 1979. Cereal and other bakery products cost 16.4% more year over year, while dairy products rose 16.2% year on year. According to the BLS August report, chicken was up 16.6%, ham and pork 9.2% and 6.8% respectively, while beef was an exception, increasing only 2.5%. Butter was up 24.6%, while peanut butter was up 15.2%, according to the BLS. Packaged foods saw significant price hikes, with frozen fruit increasing 18.5%, increasing 16.7% year on year, and spices, seasonings, and condiments and sauces increasing 15.4% year on year. Wheat, listen to this, wheat and flour prices are expected to increase between 29 and 32%. 29 to 32%. Now, wheat and barley are the specific grains that are mentioned in Revelation chapter 6 under the rider of the third horse and the famine that comes, and basically a quart of wheat, which is the equivalent of a loaf of bread or a single meal for one person, is going to cost a day's pay. And this is no coincidence that we're seeing this kind of runaway inflation and food shortages and prices being driven up. And I have to say, I've got one of the most amazing stories that we're going to wrap up with, or near the end wrap up with our time today. I couldn't hardly believe it when I read the headline. And so you're not going to want to miss this, so stick around. It's just packaged near the end of the program because that's where it seems to fit. Zero Hedge says, and the San Francisco Chronicle is quoted in the article, satellite image reveals agricultural wasteland across California's rice capital. New satellite imagery shows a large swath of California's rice fields has been left barren without harvest as fears of a mini dust bowl emerge due to diminishing water supplies. Kurt Richter, a third-generation rice farmer in Colusa, the rice capital of California, told the San Francisco Chronicle that field upon field of the grain have already transformed into a wasteland. The report via the U.S. Department of Agriculture shows about 300,000 out of the 550,000 acres committed to rice growing in California will go without harvest. Did you catch that? 300,000 out of 550,000 acres will not be harvested this year. This could potentially drive up sushi prices nationwide because most of the rice produced in the state is just for that. UC Davis agricultural economist Aaron Smith warned the collapse in rice production in the state will translate to an estimated $500 million loss for farmers, about 40% of which will be covered by federal crop insurance. And satellite imagery service Sentinel Hub shows a satellite view of the farmland in the rice capital this month compared to the same time last year, only to reveal many fields appear fallow. Richter said rice fields are abandoned and a mini dust bowl could emerge west of the Sacramento River in Colusa County. He said this summer's scorching heat and lack of moisture are some of the significant contributors to the area's water shortage, and not all is lost in the rice capital. In Butte County, green fields can be seen via satellite imagery. San Francisco Chronicle noted Butte County farmers planted slightly more acres of rice than last year. And Eastside farmers depend on Lake Oroville, which was able to capture more water than Shasta Lake, where the current storage is less than half of the average storage for this time of year. I'm here in Texas, and a lot of people talk about, the South and Texas and, the humidity and all that. And it's been tough in Southern California as far as the levels of heat and humidity. We were seeing some 90-degree heat with 84% humidity in SoCal. That's just crazy for us. And I've got a lot of family. My mom's whole side of the family is from Mobile, Alabama. So, been there many times, know what humidity is all about, and just very odd to experience that in good old SoCal, in the OC at that. So very unusual changes in weather. And, that's something else that the Bible talks about. And it's not, as we mentioned last week, it's not unusual, completely unusual that there's conversation about climate change, even though the purpose of the climate change advocates is the redistribution of wealth around the world. But the fact is, in the last days, we do know that there are going to be strange weather anomalies, because we made the point that, looking at Jesus' mention of what's going to be happening, I believe, prior to the rapture of the church and the tribulation, that will ultimately be fulfilled during the tribulation. But in this birth pang-like progression, there's going to be an increase in seismos. Now, seismos doesn't just mean geological events or earthquakes. It can also mean weather anomalies or atmospheric events. That same Greek word can go and apply to either one of those types of situations. And that's part of what we're seeing today. We're seeing very weird and wild atmospheric events flooding around the world. There's killing people. I think there's floods in Pakistan, killed over 1,000 people. And then here you've got Southern California, the breadbasket of its own self-sustaining food supply, as well as much of the rest of the country, is now experiencing a major and, as they say, catastrophic drought. But we have to remember that in Genesis 8:22, God said seed time and harvest, basically winter and summer, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, that all things are going to continue. God knows what we need to sustain life on this planet. He said, all things are going to continue, and we're going to see these highs and lows. And climate change is just another way to advance the globalist narrative and goal. And the climate does change. It's called weather, and that's what we're seeing happen. We've had 2 known ice ages in the past, and there could be no man-made climate change back then. Because there wasn't any of the industry that we see today. So, the weather does change, and we see that. And it doesn't mean that we don't take care of the planet, because we certainly do. Remember, God put Adam in the garden to tend and keep it before the fall. So it's a human responsibility to take care of where we live, and no question about that. Nobody questions that. But all of these things that are outside of our control, and to say, I'm not saying that humans and their pollution don't contribute to any of this, but certainly contributes to acid rain and things of that nature. But just all of this hype is over really just trying to have equality of outcome for everybody around the world. And people that violate their allowed carbon footprint, countries that do that, they're not going to change how much carbon they're outputting. They're just simply going to have to send money to a country who hasn't, a poor country. So it's kind of a, as they called it before, cap and trade. But listen, this is God's planet, and He is going to take care of it, and we'll get through this, and things will change. I think there's a change coming for us that's pretty extreme. I think it's going to be a change of address, where we're going to meet the Lord in the air with the dead in Christ, and then forever be with the Lord, because Jesus said, "I'm coming to get you, to take you to the Father's house." And I find it odd that there are those who say, "Well, He only meant that to the disciples. He's only coming back for them. They're dead." And He's coming back for us all. He's coming back for the church. And we who are alive and remain could include the disciples. because they've been long, their bodies have been long in the grave, even though now that they're absent from the body, their spirits are present with the Lord. The Wall Street Journal is reporting U.S. heat wave hits supermarkets' produce sections. And, I was thinking the other day, we, as many of you during the summer, love a good watermelon. And boy, it's been tough to find them. And here's part of the reason why. Heat is hurting quality and availability of lettuce, berries, and retailers seek new suppliers, scale back offerings of lower quality produce. Supermarkets say they're giving less shelf space to products with weather-induced discolorations, bruises, or burned, and high temperatures in the western U.S. are hitting the produce industry, damaging crops, shrinking shipments, and leaving fewer leafy greens and fruits on the supermarket shelves. A California grower said some of his lettuce leaves are turning brown and melting in the fields because of crop diseases intensified by high temperatures. Now, again, remember, during the tribulation, there's coming a global famine where it's going to drive prices up to where a single meal for one person is going to take a day's pay, or 3 meals. That's what the barley is, the lesser price grain. And that's why the 3 quarts of barley, if you want to opt for the lesser price grain, the barley, you can eat 3 meals, but that's still just for one person. And it's still going to cost a day's pay. So here, we're seeing again these precursors or things that could lead up to it. And I believe that we can say that with confidence today, and I'll tell you why in a moment. A New York distributor substituted honeydew melons for watermelons, which have become scarce. Supermarkets say they're giving less shelf space to products with weather-induced discolorations, bruises, or burns. Stores are cutting prices on poor quality items to avoid getting stuck with them, and increasingly receiving products from Canada, Florida, New Jersey, and Ohio instead of California, the long go-to source for U.S. growers. Mexican chili peppers used in sriracha, Italian risotto rice, American corn that's used in nearly everything. These crops are vulnerable to high heat and extreme droughts worldwide, are hitting yields, which could mean higher prices for staples this winter. We can't ship lettuce with defects, said Mark Mason, manager of California-based Nature's Reward, which grows romaine, iceberg, and leaf lettuce. These fields that are near losses. There are fields that are near losses, Mr. Mason said disease has likely cut Nature's Reward lettuce yields this year by at least 15% compared to a year ago average. Incidence of disease in the company's fields has been normal throughout the growing season until the last week to 10 days, when a surge in damaged plants has led to a dramatic decline in yields. And as I said, it's been unbelievably hot in Southern California, very unusual. And California vegetable growers said the current heat wave could be fueling diseases that kill or damage lettuce, leaving less to sell to restaurants or grocery stores. And high temps can promote diseases such as Pythium wilt and impatiens necrotic spot virus. Of course, we all know what that is. I don't. Or INSB, according to produce growers research trade groups. Pythium wilt is a soil-borne disease, while INSV is transmitted to lettuce by small insects known as western flower thrips. So again, we've got another contributing factor to the diminished food supply paired with rising prices. And, there's another thing that's going to happen under the ride of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And that is under the rider of the second horse, the red horse, the black horse. He's going to take peace from the earth that the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6:2, the Antichrist, brought to the world, this pseudo-peace. And this next story comes from Study Finds. Violence hits epidemic proportions in pandemic-era California, study shows. The Golden State is losing its luster. A troubling new report labels physical and sexual violence in pandemic-era California a statewide epidemic. To put it simply, violence is on an alarming rise. According to the new annual report from the California Study on Violence Experiences Across the Lifespan, or CalVEX, violent statistics have seen a significant increase since COVID-19 emerged. The report, conducted by scientists at the University of California, San Diego School of Medicine, reports more than 1 in 6 Californians, or 18%, experienced either physical or sexual violence in the past year. Meanwhile, 1 in every 25 Californians experienced intimate partner violence. Overall, rates of both physical and sexual violence have seen an uptick since the COVID-19 pandemic began, with physical violence nearly doubling among men between 2020 and 2022. Study authors say demographic disparities in the results may provide further insight into potential contributing factors that could have been exacerbated during the pandemic. And Californians are experiencing violence at an epidemic proportion, says principal investigator Anita Raj, PhD, professor at University of California, San Diego School of Medicine and Division of Social Sciences. In a press release, current violence prevention efforts are clearly woefully inadequate and often ignore the gendered nature of violence, its intersections with other socioeconomic vulnerabilities, and its disproportionate effects on marginalized populations. So again, Jesus said it was going to be as it was in the days of Noah. Now, there's multiple things we do know, even though it's a very limited amount of information we're given in the early chapters of Genesis, which is always kind of stunning to me that here we've got almost 2,000 years of history and just a sprinkling of sentences that tell us what the world was like at that time. And one of the things we're told is that violence filled the earth. And now we're seeing an increase in person-to-person violence. The rider on the second horse causes people to butcher one another. It's not a military engagement that's in view there in Revelation chapter 6 with the rider on the black horse. It is butchering individuals, butchering one another. And now here we're seeing that very thing on the rise in the state of California. And, you know, the article says the pandemic has been a driving force behind that. Now, in the effort to control the narrative, there's always going to be some kind of pushback. And American Military News says the bomb explodes at Northeastern University with note citing Mark Zuckerberg. A suspicious package sent to Northeastern University exploded on Tuesday, injuring one staff member, according to officials. The package contained a message criticizing Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. Just after 7 p.m. on Tuesday, a package that was delivered to Holmes Hall detonated after it was opened by a staff member who sustained minor injuries from the explosion. And the staff member was transported to a local hospital. The explosion triggered a multi-agency response, including the Boston Police Department's bomb squad, Boston Emergency Management Services, and other law enforcement agencies. The university said the building was evacuated and nearby evening classes were canceled. Now, here's the funny thing. You know, the group that is being censored by big tech, so to speak, or the social media platforms, are the group who follow the teachings of Jesus, who said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who spitefully use you. This isn't the actions of any Christian. No Christian sends a bomb or does any of these kind of things that we're often accused of. And yet we're the ones that they're trying to silence, the ones who are said to be blessed if they are peacemakers, and that we are to follow the actions of Jesus. That's what Christian means. It means Christ-like, that we live a life that is consistent with how he lived when he came into the world in the likeness of sinful flesh. So again, we're seeing, I think, a level of frustration with people in places of power that is going to lead to what we'll see during the tribulation, and the government's being overthrown. And just imagine what happens after all these people disappear in a moment and a twinkling of an eye. The dead in Christ raise, and all the things that are going to be happening on the earth. Imagine, you think identity theft is bad now. Just wait till there's millions and millions of bank accounts that are full of money. They're at least have some money, and how all the fraud that's going to take place then, and the violence and the anger and the frustration, all the things we see manifested during the tribulation. Now, we do know that we are the target, the Bible-believing Christians and the Jews. Judeo-Christian values, in essence, are what's really being targeted in this world, because the world is headed toward the leadership of a man known as the Antichrist. Remember, anti means against or instead of, and this man is going to be both. He is going to be against Christ, and the world will worship him instead of Christ. Revelation 13 says the whole world will go after him, and they will worship the dragon, who is Satan, who gives power to the beast. Now listen to this story coming out of Great Britain. The Gateway Pundit says a 2-year jail sentence for prayer outside abortion providers considered by British Parliament. This week, Labour member of the Parliament, MP Rupa Hook, has introduced an amendment to legislation that would propose a 2-year jail sentence for anyone praying with women before they go into an abortion center. Rupa Hoog is one of the most vocal supporters of abortion in the House of Commons. Her amendment seeks to enforce a buffer zone outside abortion centers. It was back in 2017 that buffer zones were first proposed as part of a public consultation by the Conservative government. The then Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, launched a review into the scale and nature of pro-life vigils outside abortion centers. There were small, silent, prayerful vigils, often by Catholic nuns. They were very different from the portrayal of gatherings outside the U.S. abortion providers that are shown by the media as loud and aggressive and forceful. Yet, British parliamentarians thought they were a problem. Prayer was bad. They're trying to shut us down in any way, shape, or form. We're protecting abortion. Sometimes you have to wonder, how long, oh Lord, how long before you intervene and shut this stuff down? And he's going to do that. There's no question about it. And that's part of the tribulation. The tribulation has two purposes. One, it finalizes the judgment of Israel and leads them through judgment to look upon the one whom they pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. And it's also God's cataclysmic wrath on a Christ-rejecting world. And so that day is coming, and it's a day unlike any other. And Jesus said if he didn't come back, he'd kill everybody on the planet. And so it's a radical, radical time, to be sure. And the only way to escape it is to be born again. In 2018, the article says, the Home Office announced that it could not find adequate reason to introduce censorship zones, yet concern about these praying nuns has not gone away. There, of course, is already legislation that exists to restrict protest activities that cause harm to others. Praying outside an abortion clinic causes harm to others. It's interesting, this article goes on to say that this woman, who is a devout Muslim, is the one leading the charge, protecting the rights to kill an unborn child. It's just unbelievable. Now, the World Health Organization, and this is the World Health Organization, and this is not disinformation for anybody out there who's wanting to scan our broadcast. This is from the World Health Organization, reported by Reuters. It says the end of the pandemic, COVID pandemic, is in sight. The world has never been in a better position to end the COVID-19 pandemic. The head of the World Health Organization said on Wednesday his most optimistic outlook yet on the years-long health crisis that has killed over 6 million people. We're not there yet, but the end is in sight. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom told reporters at the virtual press conference. This was the most upbeat assessment from the UN agency since it declared an international emergency in January of 2020 and started describing COVID-19 as a pandemic 3 years later. Now's the time to run harder and make sure we cross the line and reap the rewards of all of our hard work, he went on to say. Countries need to take a hard look at their policies and strengthen them for COVID-19 and future viruses, Tedros said. He also urged nations to vaccinate 100% of their high-risk groups and keep testing for the virus. The WHO said countries need to maintain adequate supplies of medical equipment and healthcare workers. We expect there to be future waves of infections, potentially at different time points throughout the world, caused by different subvariants of Omicron or even different variants of concern, said WHO senior epidemiologist Maria Van Kerkhove. With over 1 million deaths this year alone, the pandemic remains an emergency globally and within most countries. And the summer wave of COVID-19 driven by Omicron, BA4, BA5, showed the pandemic is not quite over as the virus continues to circulate. But again, WHO said there is hope on the horizon of this being eliminated. I was looking at that acronym, WHO, WHO, and I've always found it kind of comical that we have the United Nations Organization, UNO, and the World Health Organization, WHO. And if you put those two together, it says, you know who. So you know what they say. Well, this must be them. You know who. Anyway, sorry, thought I'd throw that out there. You can throw it out too if you want, but I've always thought that was funny. Now, here it is. This is just amazing. And to see this in print, again, like I said earlier, it just blew my mind. And tells us that the Bible is going to happen exactly as foretold, including all the things in Revelation. They're not allegory. They're not spiritual life lessons. They are hard and ugly truths, but it is what man has sown, and he is going to reap what he has sown, as the Bible has foretold. This comes from a French paper called Le Monde, and the headline reads, Iraq's Fertile Valley is dying. Authorities estimate that the Euphrates could dry up as early as 2040. As early as 2040. That's 18 years away. From the top of the oldest tourist complex built on the shores of Lake SALWA in the province of Al-Muthana in southern Iraq, the desert stretches as far as the eye can see, the article says. The buildings have been abandoned since the 2003 U.S.-British invasion. In the past, there was water up to the banks, fish and birds. We used to come to swim, picnic, and take a boat ride on the lake, recalled Abdallah, a 40-year-old cab driver who has come from the neighboring town of Samawa to enjoy the calm of the place in the middle of the day. Today, the entire ecosystem of Sawa is threatened with extinction. In April, the lake dried up completely. It formed more than 5,000 years ago near the Euphrates River at the western end of the fertile Mesopotamian valley that stretches to the Tigris River, the cradle of civilization that gave the world writing and agriculture. At the beginning of summer, water resurfaced before the lake, fed only by water table that rises through cracks and fissures in the ground. There remains only a pond in the middle of a gaping crater measuring 5 by 2 kilometers. Lake Sawa is now only 5 or 10% of its original size. It will never return to its former level. If we can at least preserve the area, it will be an achievement, said Yusuf Jabber, environmental officer for Al-Muthana province. And for a long time, Lake Sawa remained stable, explains Ali Hasnouj, an agricultural expert and former member of the Muthana Regional Council. The unique site has been protected since 2014 by the Ramsar Convention and the wetlands. And the water level began to drop in 2015. There are causes linked to climate change. Of course, they're going to go there. For 3 years, there's been no rainfall, and temperatures sometimes exceed 50 degrees centigrade in Samoa. Small earthquakes closed the springs that fed the lake, said Yusuf. Local human activity is also responsible. The lack of water in the region intensifies the competition between industrialists, farmers, and breeders appropriate to the resource. And the article goes on to say you had to join the Le Monde. I was able to read it on a couple of other papers who posted it, but they had the most specific details on the article. But they were talking about the very source that feeds us drying up, and that's why there's no hope for the lake to come back, because the Euphrates River is drying up. And what does Revelation 16 say? It says that the river is going to dry up to make way for the kings of the east to cross over. So, again, the Bible is inspired by God, proves itself to be so over and over and over again. And I just thought this was stunning to see that there was actually a headline that talked about the drying up of the Euphrates River. Take a look through Revelation 16. That's where the bowls are poured out, which are the undiluted wrath of God, the finalization of his wrath against the Christ-rejecting world. The other two, the seals and the trumpet judgments, the seventh seal and the seventh trumpet opens up the next batch, but the seventh bowl is the finalization of the wrath of God. There is nothing beyond that. So, and Revelation 16 tells us about this very thing. And here we are seeing it in the news. So God knows what he's talking about. And he can certainly write a book if he can create a universe in 6 night-day cycles. And he did. And here we are living in a very privileged time to see all this stuff being fulfilled. Now, I mention this regularly and for good reason, because it too is going to happen during the tribulation period under the bowl judgments. There's going to be a solar event that the sun is given the power to scorch men's bodies, and I believe that to be a coronal mass ejection or a solar flare. And we talked about the fact that Venus was bombarded last week. Now get this, the Hindustan Times, Earth faces triple threat from the sun. Destructive solar storm could strike us soon. The Earth has been luckily escaping the wrath of the sun, even as it ramps up in its volatility as it goes through its 11-year solar cycle. Today, the Earth stands in a very difficult situation because of these constant solar storms. Some of the strongest solar storms this year were fortunately directed towards Venus and not Earth, with the most recent one coming just last week. But now things are changing, and a terrifying time might be coming for our planet, as the same sunspot responsible for blasting powerful CMEs, or coronal mass ejections, toward Venus is now coming to the Earth-facing solar disk. And to make matters worse, two other sunspots will be joining it, and the dangers of a CME storm have increased manifold. The next few days will be a worrying time for the Earth, according to scientists. Can the strongest solar storm of them all, a G5 class solar storm, hit our planet in the coming days? And this development was reported by spaceweather.com, which noted the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration forecasters say there's a 20% chance of an M-class solar flare, but that may be an underestimate. Sunspots AR3098 and AR3101 are both increasingly active. An old sunspot AR3088, famous for hammering Venus, is now returning over the southeast limb. The two new sunspots, 3098 and 3101, are concerning, but the biggest threat comes from 3088. The sunspot has already survived one full rotation of the sun and has not dissipated. The highly unstable spot has shown its ferocity when it blasted continuous CME bursts at Venus, and if it explodes again now, the Earth would be its primary target. Think about what we talked about today: inflation, driving up food prices, violence filling the Earth, the Euphrates River drying up, the sun bombarding mankind. All of these things are covered in Revelation chapter 6, the verses I'm going to teach tomorrow. It's just a stunning time that we live in. And listen, we're going to miss it all as Bible-believing Christians, born-again Christians. And let me just say this. Jesus said in Matthew 24:44, you also be ready. And I've said this many times at different conferences. When he's ready, there's no time to get ready. That's why he said, be ready. Today is the day of salvation. Now is the time to give your life to Christ if you haven't already. The Bible cannot be challenged in its authority and historical integrity and everything else. When the Bible says a battle was fought somewhere, you go there and start an archaeological dig, and you're going to find evidence of that battle, no matter how long ago it happened. The Bible is true. And everything in the past, there's not one prophecy that was made concerning the first coming of Jesus that wasn't fulfilled. There are 8 times as many prophecies of Jesus' second coming, and we're seeing the precursors to their fulfillment already, including the things that are likened unto the days of Noah, the earth being filled with violence, there being an indifference to impending signs of judgment, a business as usual kind of attitude, marrying and giving in marriage until the day where they were taken into the ark. And that's when God's global wrath began. So that tells us that that portion of the Olivet Discourse is during the church age. That's when we're living, at the end of the church age. The time of the Gentiles is about to end. The trumpet is about to sound. The dead in Christ are about to rise. We who are alive and remain are about to meet them in the air. And, you know, one of the things that we always need to keep in mind is God said he's going to bring his people back to Israel. And he has done just that. And now we've got all these other events happening at the same time as Israel continues to age and come about to a time that we might say they've been alive for a generation, the one that won't pass away until all things take place. So once again, if you want to watch the Behold Israel conference, I'm not sure what the other guys are teaching, but that's one of the things I always love about doing these conferences, because the Holy Spirit directs the traffic. And he gives us our subjects to teach, and every single time, it's never failed. When we do a conference, one guy's message feeds into another, and we never talk to each other beforehand about what we're teaching. So it's going to be an awesome couple of days. Actually, Friday is the overflow from Saturday. The first event, Saturday, sold out so fast. They added Friday, so we're going to have an all-day thing tomorrow. And then again, you can watch online on Behold Israel's Facebook page or Behold Israel's YouTube channel, the Awaiting His Return Conference with Pastor Jack Hibbs, Amir Sarfati, Dr. Bob Pearl, and myself. And then we'll have a Q&A rounding out the day. So again, thanks to all who pre-ordered the Bible Prophecy, The Essentials, and would really appreciate it for any who are interested in getting the book, that you would go ahead and do so. And this is the age we live in. It's not about promoting self or any of those other things that we're often accused of. It's about getting the word out. We live in a social media driven age, and that's how things operate today. And people, are looking on websites and going to Amazon and see what's selling. And this is how we get the word out. And I do believe, and Amir does too, that this book is something that's necessary right now. That's why we paired up to write it. I've got another one coming out behind it, and excited about that too. But this one will be out on January 3rd. You can pre-order now, so go to Amazon if you would, and pre-order there if you would like to and intend on getting the book. So anyway, that's all we have from Fort Worth, Texas. Here it is. Thursday, the 15th of September. Glad to be with you. And my apologies for the low quality picture, and didn't bring the studio with me, obviously, or my home studio camera, but didn't want to miss being with you today. So that's all we have. So you know what to say next. I'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.
of God.